Last summer, during June, my school went to a trip, an orchestra trip to Xiamen. And in the trip, I had lots of fun and I ate lots of food. For example, shrimps, oysters, crabs, fish, seafood, since Xiamen is next to the ocean. However, after I got back home, my mom was like, Maggie, stand on the scales. I stood on the scales and watched the number go very high. And I was like, this cannot be. And I said, okay, I'm going to lose weight. And I achieved it. The process was a bit painful. I could only eat 2 meals a day, and I ate little to no oil. However, I helped myself become healthier, and without knowing it, I also helped the environment. Surprising, I know, but because I ate less, I saved more food. And because I saved food, there could have been less CO2 production. And because food waste and overconsumption is also a contribution to greenhouse gas emission. We, especially as Chinese, were taught not to waste food from a very young age. For example, this poem, 谁知盘中餐，粒粒皆辛苦, is something we all know. And who knows that every grain on our plate comes from hard toil? I've also asked for a few people close to me the question, why we shouldn't waste food. And of course, they answered with, we shouldn't waste food because there are millions of people who are starving, and we shouldn't take this as a privilege that is granted to us. And we should save food so the people who are starving, who actually need those foods, can have them. Of course, these are all very valid reasons of why we should not waste food. However, today I'm going to talk about the lesser-known reason of why we shouldn't waste food. Currently, around a third of the food produced, which is 1.3 billion tons of food per year, are wasted. And to put that into a more understandable perspective, that food, if we save it and we give it to the people in poverty and the refugees, they could feed every single one of them. It's a lot of food. And globally, food waste accounts for 8% of the carbon emissions. And although we might think, oh, but this doesn't happen around us, does it? 37% of the food waste comes from households. And not just that, but 14% of the food is lost and wasted before it even gets to the consumers. There is so much we can do to save the environment and not waste food. I can't say that I can help save the 14% of food lost, but I can do small things. Sometimes, for example, I'm sure we all do this. We see sales of food and say, oh, that's cheap, I'm going to buy that. And we buy it. We leave it in the fridge, we forget about it. Next time we open it, we see it, oh, it's expired already, and we throw it away. But have you considered that if we save this food could be fed to the people who need it, the malnourished people on the earth? The food being thrown away will be taken to a landfill to rot, and the gases produced in those landfills releases a gas about 28 times stronger than carbon dioxide. Even the process of dumping food, for example, having a truck take it to the food dump, releases greenhouse gases. Food loss impacts the climate and also wastes the resources needed to produce them. For example, it will increase the land used on agriculture, waste the water, fossil fuel, and energy spent on making those foods. Agriculture already takes up 19 to 29% of the food that we produce and the greenhouse gases that we produce. And if more land has to be turned into agriculture land, then greenhouse gas produced could increase even more. Also, about 70% of the water that we spend is on agriculture. And that much water is enough to cover the whole of China 20 centimeters deep, which is about this deep. That's a lot of water, since China's really big. And we don't even need to think that much water, like any other things it could be used for. That much water is an incomprehensible number in our minds. And just for your information, if you can't imagine it, it's 292 million tons of water. Now, I am sure we want to find ways to help solve this problem, but there might be some difficulties since we can't single-handedly stop greenhouse gas emissions, and we can't command everyone to reduce their carbon emission. But since I mentioned a problem, I am, of course, going to give some suggestions to solve this problem. So there are two things that we can do in our everyday life, two very simple things. First of all, as I mentioned before, agriculture uses 70% of the water we consume every year. And if a third of that is wasted, then we can calculate with really easy math that if we don't waste that water, there's about 23.3% of the water that can be saved. I mean, obviously it's not that easy since there's so many other factors we have to consider when we try to save water. However, even if we don't know the exact number, we can still imagine that that number would be very big. Water wasted could be, in turn, used to help the refugees or people in poverty or people who can't get access to healthcare or clean water, and we can give them to those people. Some of the most common foods we leave left over require more water than we think needed to grow them. For example, rice. We all eat that, right? Rice. Growing 1 pound of rice requires 650 million pounds of water. Gallons of water. Only 1 pound of rice requires that much water. Another thing, coffee. I'm sure some of us might have just had a cup of coffee before we even came here. 1 pound of coffee requires 2,300 gallons of water to produce. And already we can do something. Drink all our coffee and eat all our rice. Rice, I know sometimes we might cook rice and have it left over, but there's something really easy we can do. For example, make it into fried rice, and we can eat it the second day. Another way to contribute is to just buy and eat less in general. If we all stop buying food that we don't need, for example, like I mentioned before, we buy food because of sales, but if we stop buying that food, then we can save all that food for the people who actually need it. School cafeterias, if we still go to school, that is, if we are in school cafeterias and we only take as much as we need, then we won't need the bins to dump those the leftover food, since I know that some schools might have a bin to throw away the food that you can't eat. If we save all that food, then so many people could be helped instead. Sometimes we might also like to eat buffets, but buffets are also another giant contribution to food waste, since many of those foods that are put out can't be saved for the second day and therefore have to be thrown away. And of course, I know that we all want to help reach the 2025 goal. And if we encourage the people around us to follow those two really simple steps that we can do every day, then I'm sure we can reach that goal by 2025. However, if we all do nothing and just continue to waste food and waste these resources, then the goal can only be a dream we dreamed in time gone by. Thank you.